Thank you for listening to Lone Star Community Radio. This program was broadcasted and recorded live from the LSCR studios in downtown Conroe, Texas. Lone Star Community Radio is supported by listeners like you. Donate and sponsor today. For more information on getting involved with Lone Star Community Radio, contact us at lscrstudios@gmail.com or visit us online at www.irlonestar.com.
All right, you're listening to Crime Scene Today. I'm Dan Zentek. We talk about current and future issues affecting law enforcement, crime scene, and forensic investigations. I'm here at TDII, the Texas Division of the International Association for Identification in Austin at their educational conference. With me today, I have Jack Flanders, a fingerprint examiner. And so today we're going to talk about what that is and just sort of delve into some different jobs that crime scene and different areas of forensic discipline are. So, Jack, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
To start out, I've known Jack a while, and one of the nicest and kind people, very generous with his time, and just a wonderful person to be around. I wanted to take some time just to learn a little bit more and share a little bit more about a fingerprint examiner. So that's a unique, I guess, discipline specific. I mean, most CSIs go out, taking photographs, fingerprint, sketch, all the many things that we do, but you specifically deal with fingerprints, right? So could you explain just where, I guess, the difference between a crime scene investigator, fingerprint examiner?
Sure, and I am certified through the II in both latent prints and crime scene. And part of my background, I did start off in a 10-print fingerprint unit for about 1.5 years. And I did transfer into a laboratory where my primary duties were latent print examination. And fortunately, I'm thankful that a large portion of that was also crime scene response. And so I did participate in crime scene response for a number of years, which I would say has definitely influenced my laboratory work as latent prints only. So since about, I'd say ballpark around 2018, I had not responded to scenes anymore, so it's just primarily latent prints. So my normal day-to-day really is processing evidence that is sent into a laboratory to try to obtain usable latent print evidence, and then photographing, preserving, and then going into to comparison duties.
So now, as far as you said, you'd gone to scenes before. So what would you say is some of the challenges between, so you being a CSI on a scene, having more, I guess, context, right, versus you receiving something just in a lab environment?
Right. And it's interesting because I would say, fortunately, communication is just such an important component. If you take something like a Coca-Cola can and it's from a burglary of a habitation, a lot of times on the latent print side, I may not need that much context to know that I'm going to typically visually examine something like that, then possibly superglue, fume, put on a dye stain, and then look at that with a laser. And there may not be much that I need from the scene to know how to process that, versus maybe you have an object that is partially covered in blood or what you believe to be blood. And, you might need some more scene context from that, right, to know how you would process it. So with something like that, I am very dependent on an offense report from the investigator that was on scene, and or picking up the phone and making those phone calls and talking to the scene investigator to make sure that I'm, utilizing the correct chemicals.
Now, would you say a majority of the stuff that y'all receive at the lab is already processed, that y'all are doing something with, or that y'all are more responsible for processing? Like you get one you just get a can, or you get something, or is it something that's already been processed you're doing?
I would say it's all across the board. I receive lift cards, so those are from an object that's already been powdered, and they're just submitting the lift cards, or maybe they're just submitting photographs. Our customers also submit unprocessed items, which I would say is probably the majority of what we get. And some of these objects, maybe they have already been processed or even partially processed. We try to work really closely with a lot of different agencies. It's one of my favorite things about the job is all the different agencies we work with have different budgets. What kind of chemicals they can afford and what they have access to. So, for example, an agency might only have access to enlighten, which we would primarily use for processing of porous surfaces, paper, cardboard, things like that. So maybe they have a robbery note and they process that with enlighten, and so that's the tool that they have for that item. And maybe they have developed a print, but it's not enough. There's not enough information there to proceed. Well, we do have other chemicals like endione, which would be a very similar reaction, but it's going to be fluorescent. So we could still use a chemical like that. And we were talking earlier about we've recently acquired this green narrow bandpass filter, which I know we're kind of getting in the weeds on that, but I'm excited about it still right now.
No, go ahead. Talk about it. You did. So what you're talking about is one of the things we use to enhance many types of evidence, not just fingerprints, but as different wavelengths, different alternative light sources and stuff. And so you had done some work with this filter. So why don't you talk about that?
Sure. So there are times where you'll utilize different fluorescent techniques and you can see that there is rich detail that is developed, but maybe you're having a contrast issue and you can't quite differentiate the print from the background. Not uncommon to see this on maybe cardboard boxes, brown paper sacks, and even just a lot of paper in general. So I'd read an article from Brian Dalrymple in the JFI years ago about this green narrow bandpass filter. It looked very interesting. Me and one of my coworkers, Brian Strong, give him a shout out right now. We had looked into it. We were very interested. And but it was expensive. It was a very, very expensive camera filter, and we all have budgets, and you know what you have in front of you, right? We're always trying to learn more and see what else is out there. Well, from going off and teaching some different classes, across the ways. I've got another buddy. His name's Bob Gallagher, and he's up in Massachusetts. And I was talking to him, and he basically has the same filter, very similar setup to what I have. He's got a laser, and he said he kind of gave me that additional feedback that yes, no, this really does work well in casework as well. It's not just something that you're some snake oil that people are trying to sell you. So now I have that literature component. I have another practitioner with very similar equipment tell me the same thing. And then another component popped up that I wasn't expecting. My supervisor, lab manager had come by and they said, hey, we've got some extra money. We need to get this spent. Do you have a wish list? Well, if anybody knows me, I always have a wish list of things. And
those are always the nice end of budget conversations when they come by, have money they'd like to spend.
Yep. So, of course, thank you to them. And so we did. We ordered it. It came in and tested it out. Did a bunch of test images, different people. I think we used about 5 to 10 different subjects, and processed different items, different pieces of paper, copy paper, lined paper, cardboard, paper sacks, and took pictures with and without the filter, compared those side by side, and was really excited with the results. It's if your print's fluorescing really well with normal wavelengths, normal filters, you don't need this. Right. This really is a specialty tool for when you're having those contrast issues, and really noticed that it was really a game changer with some of those prints.
So now you talked about a couple of different, items needed to accomplish this. Obviously, expensive filter and a laser. So what all, like if I wanted to do this, what all equipment is needed to do that type of bypass?
Yeah, I would say you would definitely need an ALS of some sort. You would need a fluorescent light. because that's really what you're trying to accomplish here is you're trying to block out some of this, the wavelength of light, and in the visible spectrum, this isn't going to be a tool you're really going to need. So if you have your ALS and then you have a camera that you're using to capture this, you would need to make sure that it's going to be compatible with the lens you're using, or get a a step-up ring to fit that on there.
So for camera, we're just talking like a regular 35 SLR or mirrorless type of camera. So the camera itself, there's nothing special about that
Correct.
part of it. Okay.
Yep. Whatever you're using should still be compatible with this. Would highly recommend the macro lens for sure if you're doing that. And then typically my setup is a green laser, and then there's a curved orange filter that comes with that stays on my camera most of the time. So in this application, I'm stacking the green filter on top of the orange. Now you don't have to do that, and I would have to go back to the article, but I believe that there's some other light sources and other scenarios where you may want to take the orange off and use the green only. But for our setup with the laser, this is going to be ideal in most situations.
Now on the ALS, is this more on the infrared, the ultraviolet? Where is it falling on
Sure.
your nanometers?
Sure. So I'm targeting with that green laser. We're dialed in at 532 nanometer.
Okay. And so just for curiosity mainly, so how expensive is this laser? Obviously a specialized budget type
Sure.
thing, so
Well, and the lasers obviously vary. All equipment varies in price over the years, right? This laser, when it was first purchased, which is a while back, would have been somewhere in the ballpark of about $43,000. Now you can look at there's a lot more on the market now. There are dual band lasers where you can make the investment probably more around the mid 20,000 range and get a green and a blue laser, which could be pretty advantageous. The LED technology has also improved quite a bit. I have not done too much direct comparisons between the LEDs and the laser. I have a hard time thinking that an LED can outperform a laser, but
Right.
I think that there are some out there, some specific ones that I'm thinking of that are pretty remarkable in what they can
so
do.
there's some new research for you right there.
There you go.
Get a hold of an LED and the laser and see. I mean, now are LEDs any less expensive though? I mean, as far as the powerful ones, the ones that would be doing this.
Right.
I mean, I would think they possibly would be less, but
Depending on how you do it and which package you go with. Obviously, I think you could part something down to get just the LED components that you'd want to test, and you probably could find something a lot cheaper.
But what about the filter now? So you said the filter
So
itself is pretty.
The green filter itself, the one that we purchased, was right around $2,000.
Okay.
Now, that being said, there are other ones out there that I did not test that I think that would also be a really neat place for some research. If there's any students listening, I think if you found green narrow bandpass filters and tested out some different makes and models and see if there's any big differences.
Okay. So now back a little bit as far as fingerprint examiner here. So obviously you had to go through a process to get where you are and what you do on a regular basis, besides just dealing with crime scenes. So tell us sort of that pathway, right? I mean, as far as I guess someone who may want to be in a lab, who may really be interested in that particular discipline over others.
So my career began about coming up on 16 years ago. So I do recognize that, there are a few differences from when I first started to, people entering the workforce today. I do consider myself pretty lucky. I, graduated with a bachelor's degree, and I did mine in anthropology, biology, and we had done a fingerprint lab one day, and it was interesting. I enjoyed it. I primarily studied osteology in school. And I literally saw a job posting that said something about fingerprints, and it looked interesting, and I applied for it and got it. So I don't think that that's really
That's not how it's done anymore.
no. So I did have that. I felt lucky to have the degree. I think that that is very necessary these days. You are seeing requirements from the Forensic Science Commission, coming out, certification requirements, accreditation requirements, where I think having a degree is going to be very advantageous. Having a degree in a hard science will also be advantageous. I'm noticing that a lot of people that we've been hiring on over the past probably 5 to 8 years, they have master's degrees, where I think a lot of us, I guess now I'm one of the old hats, a lot of us don't. So those are the people that you would be competing against, or a lot of people with master's degrees that are looking for jobs all over the nation. So you really do need to set yourself apart there. But when I came on, it was, I felt very lucky that my agency has a very formalized training program. And I would encourage people looking for jobs to actually look at what is your employer providing for you, or do they have an extensive training program that you're going to go through, to, I think, circling back to what you'd mentioned earlier, to achieving a degree of competence,
Right.
to move forward in your work.
Or is it multidiscipline? Like if you're in fingerprint, is it one day you're doing fingerprint, another day you're doing toxicology, or you're doing DNA? Are those all separate? And is there something different in preparation? Obviously, because what I see is like a master's degree in forensic science, right? It seems like they touch on all of these things,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm unaware, at least personally, of a lab that cross disciplines, right? I mean, usually if you're in one, you're in that one.
Right. And you know how it is. Different agencies do things different ways. I can mostly speak to mine, but we specialize. So I am a latent print examiner, and that is my main specialty. That being said, I am very thankful for the cross-training I had in crime scene, because I have absolutely used some of those components for my latent print work, but let's circle back to that. I think to answer your question, we specialize. So trace evidence is going to stick with trace. Toxicology is going to stick with tox. I think having that master's degree that touches on everything benefits you. I definitely think in the state of Texas, if you're going to be a toxicology examiner, if you're going to be a DNA examiner, if you're going to be a firearms examiner, you're going to be required to be licensed. To get that license, you are going to have to take a generalized test that covers all these disciplines. So you're going to need that background.
So who would you be licensed through? I guess who provides that license?
The Texas Forensic Science Commission.
Okay. And now they're setting standards, as you talked about, that like you're now needing degrees in this and that. Do you think at some point, just your opinion, that they're going to be, I guess, knocking out some people that possibly could have been in those, or do you think it's more beneficial? I mean, it's always been a question, like experience over academic classroom education.
Right. I do personally believe in the academic component of it. I think that is very helpful. But you're right, especially in my discipline, like in latent prints, a lot of the most successful people are those people that have that artistic eye. Like, I wouldn't say that I have a natural ability for this. I would say that I had a very excellent training program, and I go to as many trainings and I try to practice as much as possible, to try to increase that skill set. Whereas somebody that might be more artistic or really just have that natural eye for it, that would really be a shame to lose somebody like that just because they didn't have a degree. So I acknowledge that, although I do agree with that educational component, I might be a little bit wrong here. I do.
Well, no,
understand.
it's an ongoing debate, right? Across the board, because you look at some of the people who we look up to from just the we sort of call the legends in the disciplines and field that have passed all this on, and many have no degrees, and so it's very hard to say, oh, you need it, and nearly feel like to a point you're dismissing all they've done, because and one of the arguments is like, okay, really, how is U.S. history going to help me in this, right? But not to dismiss the fact of all the other courses, the scientific methods, the research, the writing, the many other disciplines, even not directly related to that field that you learn through an academic education, right?
Sure. Even some of the stuff that I would say that I completely underestimated when I was in college that I never thought would have mattered for anything, my speech comm class.
Oh, yeah.
That speech comm class I see why it was a core class. Like that really, communication, especially in a laboratory where you've got a lot of certain type personalities, like being able to effectively communicate is probably just as important as the actual skill set.
Oh, yeah. And most of the time, if you are in any type of role like that, you're going to not only communicating with we'll call them your customer, your coworkers, but also the public. Usually you're going to be presenting on whatever your discipline is and having the ability to do that and to teach that, which is also your communication stuff.
Right.
In fingerprints, you doing this 16 years, okay, obviously, and you would have the answer way better than I with how long ago we've been using fingerprints, right? Are we like late 1800s, it's like early 1900s? So it may even go back further than that.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has advanced. Everything is changed due to technology and otherwise, even though, friction ridge detail is friction ridge detail. So what has really changed over 16 years, right?
Sure. Yeah, I would say because in my opinion, this is a really, if you look at it the right way, this is a very fun time to be involved in this discipline. I would think a lot of your listeners would probably be aware of the NAS report. Is that fair?
There's no telling who's listening.
Okay. So the National Academy of Sciences released a report in 2009, and it was very critical of a lot of forensic disciplines and in fingerprints in particular. However, if you also look at it as the fingerprint discipline really wanting more research and more funding to do research, a report like that really sets the stage for something like that to occur. And to obtain some of that government funding. So I transferred to the latent print unit the month that report came out. So my entire career has been this, slow shift, and we're all at different points in that shift. So for me, some of the things that have changed the most would be how we articulate things. So going from an identification to the exclusion of all others, that there is no error rate, 100% certainty, things like that, where I would not say those things in front of a jury today.
Right.
And now, like on the horizon, the next step from that would be looking at some of these conclusion scales. So the Organization of Scientific Area Committees, we'll just go with OSAC, because we're probably throwing a lot of acronyms at you today. So there's a lot of standards and proposed standards that are coming out, and we're seeing this kind of shift, where on the one side, well, maybe they want to just hear, they being the customer, is it them, is it not them? Well, if we look at some of the other comparative disciplines, a lot of other disciplines have already gone to this, and they've been doing it for a long time using degrees of association. And now, there's other disciplines that are kind of saying some things that maybe we said as a latent print discipline 5-10 years ago. So you can kind of see the shift that we're living in. And I personally think I think we're on the right path. Another thing would be a lot of these research projects have shown us some neat things over the years. Just trying to articulate, like a common question: how many points is enough? How many do you need for an ID? And kind of going from this, well, it depends on the print. I can't really tell you that. It depends on the quality and the clarity of the impression. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean that's a component. That's a component there, but What about where you are in the print? Like if you're specifically talking, like usually we say fingerprint, right? But your fingers, the segments of your fingers, your palms, your feet, all have the friction-ridged skin. But most of the research we have and most of what we know is from the distal end of the finger. You know, I mean, a lot of the other stuff is coming, but it's not quite there yet. So where are you in the finger? Like if you take a delta area, it's a lot more commonality from an unknown individual or maybe a large database search. And so I think a lot of examiners knew that intuitively, but now we're arming ourselves with more like actual research studies to articulate why you would need more information in an area like that.
Talking about technology, because I know just in the course of a couple of decades, I mean, with everything, the technology and computers have played such a big factor. I mean, from the days of taking print cards to comparison to now entering into an automated system to try to track people and narrow it down and all that. So sort of walk through what would be the current technology process, right? So like I've submitted this print to you, or I've submitted something that you got a print off of. Now you have a print. So now what happens?
Right. So let's go back to the Coke can example. You submitted the Coke can, and I've used various processing techniques, and I've observed a print there. So I'm going to put a scale next to it. It's one of the number one things we want to get in our image. And then I will photograph that with a camera. I'm very, very reliant on cameras in this line of work. And at that point, I will upload that. We have a digital management system where we're tracking anything that would occur with that photograph. So it's got a digital chain of custody with anything that occurs with it, from calibrating it to doing any type of photoshopping techniques. After any, and I digress, that original raw image that we take, that's not a writable image. Nothing's going to occur with the original. So we're doing any processing techniques, digital processing with the working image. We're still printing off the prints at that point. We're hoping to go to more of a digital only workflow here within the next, I would say 1 to 2 years.
Okay.
So that would be our goal. I know a lot of agencies are currently doing that. And then I don't know if everyone would think about this, but like on your unknown impression, you want to make sure that you're analyzing that in really any type of comparison work and looking at, what characteristics am I going to use? Do I think it's a finger? Do I think it's a palm? Do I think it's the prehensile tail of a monkey? What is this anatomical source that I'm thinking?
Well, and you make a good point by that, because, when we keep talking about fingerprint, we always picture like this perfect, finger that you have put, when you cash a check at a bank and you put your thumbprint down,
right?
And just this perfect thing. That's not what you get, right? I mean,
no,
you get
or the knowns. Right. Commonly, the known print might look worse than the unknown impression, or the context we were talking about earlier from crime scene. If anybody's ever processed a vehicle before, if you're in the interior window on the passenger side, lower right section, what is that impression that's over there? It's probably a toe, right? Because people put their feet up on the dash and their toes touch right there. So sometimes that context information, or if we have anybody that does do a lot of vehicle processing, and you're black powder lifting, oh man, the diagrams that you put on these lift cards and the orientation arrows can be wildly helpful to the person comparing the prints later, right?
Right. So you get a sliver of something that you're trying to find enough detail that could differentiate it, or I guess compare it to another print. So after you feel there's something there, I guess how do you check it against a database, or how does that correlate?
Well, that's a really good question that you just asked. Like, how do I feel about it, right? So I am a fan of trying to get away from, I feel like this print is this. I want to look at this unknown impression and look at the data that's available. Like I want to look like we had Mac Brazel here teaching this week on his logical latent analysis course. Well, one of the big things he does in there is just really reiterate, hey, what are we doing during the analysis? What information, what data do we have in this unknown impression? Are we lucky enough that we have like the shape of a thumb? Like a lot of times you can have enough shape there where you say, hey, this impression, judging by this particular shape, appears to be more likely to have come from a thumb. And then maybe you have like a little fan out area on the top of that where you say, oh, I think that this might have come from a left thumb. So it doesn't mean that that is what it came from, but that is some analysis information that you are documenting. And then I'm going to look at what characteristics I see in there. And I say, okay, I have 8 characteristics in this impression. I believe it to be from a thumb. It could be originating from a left thumb. I think I know which way is up in this impression. So that data meets my suitability criteria. So I'm going to call this usable based on that data. And then I'm going to send that over to my coworker, who is then going to go through my documentation and either confirm, yes, I agree that this looks usable, or I see what you have marked here, but I think you need to also check this other orientation during your search.
Okay.
So I think a lot more goes into the analysis than a lot of people realize.
So now after it's analyzed, after it's checked off, your partner says, yep, good to go. Now what happens to it?
So now I'll proceed to the comparison phase. So do I have any known subjects, victims, elimination, suspects, anybody of interest to compare? If I do, were any known prints, exemplars submitted? If not, I will check our state database and see if I can print off any known impressions there, and which is very common. There's tons of applicant cards and everything in there, so a lot of people do have prints on file. And then I can proceed to an actual magnifier comparison of this print to the 10-print card. And that is a component we're hoping to make more digital, is to keep this analysis documentation and the comparison process on screen instead of printing out all this.
Now, is there some type of search along in this process? Like, so I have an ag robbery, or I have a murder, I've got a print, I have an unknown. How do we go from that like unknown to all of a sudden, this is Bob Smith, right?
So let's say during this process, we've called this print usable, we've marked what we're going to use to compare, but there is suspect unknown, no victim listed. That's common. Okay, well, now we're going to proceed to an automated search. My agency has a slightly different workflow than a lot of other agencies, so this is where we might bifurcate a little bit. I'm going to throw a fingerprint joke.
Yes.
So I realize what I'm about to say is going to be different than what a lot of other agencies do. So I will take this unknown impression, this digital image, and I will forward that. We have an internal folder where I can forward that to our APHIS unit, and I'm basically submitting it to them, and they can then launch a search into our known database. And so they can search, and something else for, especially any newer investigators, you need to make sure you're cognizant that APHIS is not one database. There are multiple databases that can be searched. Any accredited laboratories that you're working with will list which databases specifically were searched, because it could depend on the crime that occurred, which databases are getting plugged into. And there are some future databases that will be coming online that we would have access to. So typically, let's say you're at a police department or a sheriff's office, you will have more of a local database that could be shared by multiple agencies or maybe not. Then that is launched, if it does not hit, is launched into the state database. If it doesn't hit there, then it's launched into the FBI database. And there's also like the DHS has a database, DOD has a database, so those can also.
So how do you end up in these databases? I mean, obviously, the most obvious one is you have been arrested for something, and
how the knowns end up in there, okay.
Right? And you obviously that's a profile. I know some people come in to get like real estate license, those things. Do those go?
Teachers, real estate, us.
Right.
We're in there. Law enforcement's in there. A lot of concealed handgun was the other one I was trying to think of. All of these licenses, it depends on the license, but the vast majority of them are retainable applicants that go in those databases.
And so, how long does an average, like when you start searching? Because I'm not going to say like when you send it. Obviously, there may be a backlog of tons of cases.
Sure.
They may not get to it, but like once I'm sitting down I'm just going to call it the APHIS machine. I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that, but we're just going to call it the APHIS machine. When I sit down there, about how long of a process between unknown and a possible?
Sure, and keep in mind, I am not the one that sits in front of that computer, but we have really good people that do that, and they get results pretty quick, and they definitely get to our stuff pretty quick as well.
I mean, that in itself is an art of its own of being able to, I guess, enter the stuff and go through all the, because it kicks back possibles, right?
Right.
It's not like it's like boom, it's Bob.
No,
right?
you say how many candidates do you want it to list, right? Do you want to? I think it's common to get about 10, 20, depending on your agency. Some agencies might even limit it on offense type. They do a lot of hard work going through all those prints, and they'll run through that candidate list, and it's definitely not like on TV where there's this,
not 2 minutes. It tells you where they currently are located by GPS location
with an upside down print.
Right. No, that's we're getting there though, right? That'll be like next month.
Sure,
we'll have that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Next upgrade.
Yes, that's just waiting for the firmware.
Right.
But so now that's where we currently are. So, and we know that there's some standards being set and some different things as far as to make sure we're maintaining a high standard in the discipline. But where do you see technology taking us next?
Well, so one of the places that I'm very interested in is UV technology, IR technology. Lasers have been in the game for a while, and they're working great. Everything is working great with the lasers, and we do so much more photography these days than I think would have been, like in the 70s and 80s. I think you're seeing a lot more black powder lifting and things like that back then. But I really do think that UV is probably where we're heading, where you're going to see a lot less processing, I think. And again, I could be totally wrong. But if you can limit which chemicals you're spraying on, then you're limiting how much chemical you're preparing. Like you're limiting that cost. The time that it takes to apply chemical. 'Cause again, a lot of people think that one pretty print or that one little can. I mean, you haven't lived until you've processed a 96-gallon trash can that had, a deceased individual in it in, Texas July weather. You
seem like there's some trauma involved there. You seem like, do we need to talk further through this?
There's some memories there.
Now, even at this conference, one of the booths, and I mean, not mentioning a vendor's name or otherwise, but they have a camera that is able has filters built in, has the light sources built in,
right?
Able to take pictures or the print, and there's no development, meaning as far as powders and other things. I mean, it's just you're walking around scene with this. I mean, is that sort of what you're talking about, where you're seeing this?
I think you smell what I'm stepping in.
Yeah, so how? I mean, right now it's still expensive. I mean, I know the product that they're selling is like $40,000.
Well, and I don't know if you saw the other one that was a little bit more, and by that I mean a lot more. That had a lot of LED technology built into it as well, where you think about you're limiting the processing, but some of the processing could still, make those like even more capable. Like I think super glue fuming would probably still have a place. Some of the 2-stage fuming where it's got a fluorescent dye mixed in with the super glue, and also in some of the ultraviolet powders things like that are out there. I think when you combine those things together, I think there's a lot of meat on the bone there. I do.
So now I've heard pet peeve of some fingerprint examiners. Okay.
Okay.
So just your opinion. Okay. Fluorescent powders, non-fluorescent, black or white. Yeah. I mean, so
I subscribe to Jocko's thinking of pet peeves are stupid. So yeah, that's an emotional thing, right? That we need to be careful of. So yeah, absolutely. When I first started getting into fingerprints, right? You're really looking at like black powder on white cards. Like that's what fingerprint people want to see. Like you take that white powder and the fluorescent powders, you throw those in the trash can, and
right.
You don't need those. And I'd like to talk about gel lifters too. Before we get too far off of this, you think, oh, the gel lifters are garbage. You just want tape, lift
right.
card, black powder, right?
Do you think that's just because of what they were used to? They didn't want something different, that they actually saw a negative thing to it?
I think that our discipline is the good and the bad, because this is a dichotomy for sure. We are surrounded by like amazing people. We are standing on the shoulders of just geniuses, right? We were talking earlier about a gentleman out of Hondo PD that got a print on a pickle, just amazing stories like that. And some of these challenging surfaces that you get a print on, like I don't know if people realize that, like in the laboratory, we're very excited, to process some of these items. But when you have a mentor figure like that has had so much success and they don't like something, you usually take that to heart, right? Now, it could just be something simple where that's their comfort zone, or that's where they've excelled and they've had so much success. And, or it could even be a budget thing, maybe where they don't have the good light source that they need. I've seen a lot of people use fluorescent powders without the light source at all. Well, that's not really what that was designed for.
Right.
And, that may be a contributing factor to maybe why they don't like something like that. Well, we'll circle back to gel lifters, but the powders, I see them as tools. All these different colors, they're all different tools for different purposes. The vast majority of the time, the black powder is going to do what you want it to do. There are black fluorescent powders out there that have a small amount of fluorescent powder mixed in. I personally am a big fan of those because you put them on and they look black, but then you also have another go at them with your light source. I think that is really neat. Some of my friends over at the Louisiana State Police kind of changed my mind on fluorescent powders on vehicles. Okay. A lot of these vehicles have these like metallic kind of paint jobs, and the black powder doesn't look great on those. So utilizing a fluorescent powder, and I would highly encourage people to like use your light source with the powder as you're processing. I think that can be a very, very helpful thing to do. But the black with the fluorescent mixed in, you have a better chance of not getting too much fluorescent powder on. Like fluorescent powder is something that if I'm going to use that, I don't care how much experience I have, I'm going to go test that on an item first, increase my comfort zone with it, and make sure I'm ready to go on my actual piece of evidence, because it's not a tool that I use every day.
Right? So, I mean, the general, I guess, thought is to create contrast, right? So, I mean,
yes, achieve contrast.
Whatever we can do to achieve contrast to get the details that we need for identification, right?
Yeah, or maybe you're really into utilizing Dalrymple's subtraction technique, where you're using a completely different colored powder to the background, and that's why you're doing that. And you're going to utilize, colors in Photoshop to remove backgrounds, or maybe you're going to completely erase the print and use two different photographs and stack those together. I mean, there's different techniques for different reasons, definitely.
Okay, so now you want to talk about gel lifters.
I do. One other thing though is the like the bichromatic or the silver powders.
Right.
Like I'll see those a lot on like a black surface. I agree that they look great on a black surface. I think that your photograph of them is your best evidence. Right. If you're not taking a photograph and you're going to lift that and put it on a black card, I think you're losing some of that contrast that you just achieved, by utilizing even just, your flashlight, which is one of your most valuable tools. But yes, gel lifters.
Okay.
So I like gel lifters because I used to hate them. And I really like when people show me how I'm thinking about something incorrectly. So a couple of things with the gel lifters.
So just to pause for a second. So just to explain to those that may not know. So what the difference between a gel lifter or just tape or whatever?
Right. So your standard approach, if you apply the black powder to a surface, you put transparent lifting tape on that to lift the powder off, and then you apply that to usually a white contrasting background. That would be your standard lift card. So you're seeing through the tape, so it would be positionally correct looking at it. With a gel lifter, whether you're utilizing a white gel lifter with black powder, or maybe you're using a black gel lifter to try to lift a dust impression, which I think would be a more common use for them, you're applying the backing to the surface. So when you take that off, your impression is now a mirrored image of what you would expect to see, especially compared to the regular lift card. So I was basically told, that a lot of people did not like to use the gel lifts. Like, it was just not as common of a tool. However, if you're on a little bit of a textured surface, or if you have just a couple different heights, maybe even just two heights on your surface that you're trying to mitigate a little bit during your lift, you have a little more play on the gel lift. Also, we had one where it was a female decedent found in a vehicle, and they were wondering, there were a lot of questions to, at exactly what point, was she still alive when she was in the vehicle? Was she already deceased and placed in the vehicle? She didn't have shoes on, and there was red mud outside, and you could see the same mud on her feet. Well, when I examined the interior windshield of the vehicle, you could see dirt, barefoot impressions on there. So of course I'm going to photograph those, but to try to recover them, gel lift really is the tool for that. Right. I think that's going to be a lot more successful than a regular piece of lifting tape. So I utilized a black gel lift, and it came out great. So here's the disconnect, though. Once you take that gel lift off, I would say the number one way that I'm going to recover that impression is I'm going to put a scale next to that immediately, and I'm going to try to photograph that on the gel lift as soon as I take it off.
Okay.
And I think that is a little bit of a component where if you take the gel lift off, whether you're of the school of thought to put the protector back on or not, I don't want to argue that, because there are pros and cons for both. But once you put that protector on there, that's typically how I've seen them in the past, and it looks like there's nothing there. You have to take that protector back off and then utilize oblique lighting and photography to see if there's actually something there. So I think that's a little bit of a disconnect in the community that I hope we can increase awareness that you can take that plastic back off.
Yeah. So, I mean, in the general statement of many things that we've talked about is don't discount any tools that you have. I mean, the main goal that we have is to make sure that we are getting the best data possible for the possible identification, whether it's for a victim to identify them, a suspect to identify them, to make sure we're very accurate and detailed with our work. So whatever tools we have in our arsenal, to not dismiss them just because someone's preference, right?
Right.
It may work on one thing, not work on another.
Right.
We know it's there.
Yeah, you gotta think like a proton. You gotta stay positive.
So, well, Jack, I appreciate your time. I appreciate all you've done for the TDII. Just on a finishing note, you have just wrapped up as chairman, previous as president of this organization. You've done some amazing things for the organization, for forensics in general. We thank you so much for that, and I appreciate your time today and talking with us about your discipline.
Thank you, sir. I really, really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.